Thank you, Tim. So let's take a look what Telecom Italia, which is Telecom Italia view on the service layer and its evolution. First of all, let me say that this presentation has been prepared together with Francesco Vadala and Cecilia Corbi that can be here, but it's going to represent the Telecom Italia view on this topic. This is our group, maybe everybody know. We are the incumbent operator in Italy. We are present also in Latin America, Brazil in particular. We are convergent operator, fixed and mobile, with more than 100 million mobile customers. And the annual revenue are more or less 30 billion euros. Okay, let's take a look at the basic history. In the 80s, the scenario, at least in Italy, was very, very simple. No mobile communication, no competition between the different operators. And starting from the 90s, we saw the introduction of new very popular services still in the whole domain of the operator. And then the revolution with a particular focus and role for devices. This is a very brief excursus of what happened from the very beginning, 30 years ago, more or less, with the first Dynatec from Motorola. And then to one of the first wearable devices, the Galaxy Gear introduced this year, some months ago. So there was the so-called feature phones age that was very relaxing for mobile network operators because the framework was very well defined. From traditional standard development organization as 3GPP from the late 90s and ETSI, of course. So the network and the service were very well binding, and the revenues and the margins were high and weren't experiencing any particular threat from over-the-top services. And moreover, the behavior of the device was under the control of the operator and very well predictable. And then we experienced this revolution. Year started in 2007 with the introduction of the first popular smartphone by Apple, and even more important, some months later, with the introduction of the apps store. So this model bringing us in the downloadable apps era with the network-centric paradigm, this less and less relevant to the value chain. And the service defined, built, and sold by carriers, unfortunately, are now perceived as commodities. And the market, in some way, is driven by the appeal of the devices as product itself, and by the wide availability of appealing applications in the store. These are everybody knows these are the driver nowadays, and the service for sure is identified with the application itself. And you can notice that you can even replace the dialer application in your smartphone and put, instead of the dialer on the desktop of the smartphone, your desired over-the-top messaging application. So, which can be the way forward. This was the problem statement, and is very clear, consolidated, because everything happened starting some years ago. So it's not a new fact, and we are experiencing this trend each year when we look at the revenues, the margins of mobile operators. It's a reality. So we have to enter, for sure. There is no alternative in the application space. And how? This, just to bind this idea with the strong picture, so this famous Italian painting, School of Athens, where there is, I like to think at this as an ancient SDO, and there was some delegate focusing on the upper layer, and some other instead focusing on the lower layer, but they cooperated. And try to find a balance, a profitable balance. So the way forward can be highlight, find, extract the value that is in the lower layers of the network, and offer this to over the top, because they don't have to consider anymore the network as an IP, flat IP connection with no interesting characteristic, and all the network being the same. This is not true, and if we really want that OTT become our customers, as the previous speaker said, Bob, we have to offer something. So we have to recouple again the application layer and the network layer. And the purpose of service layer SDO as OMA should be to find innovative enabler to realize this paradigm of coupling again apps and network layer. Here there is a concrete example, a work item that is going on here in OMA, and it shows all these characteristics. First, this is called DANE, Device Apps Network Efficiency, and in some way it leverages another important work item, that is the QoS network APIs being defined by architecture working group. And this framework, just to give an example, has all these characteristics, because it is able to directly engage application developers, because if you are an app developer, for example, and your application is related to video streaming, you can exploit a mechanism, a simple device API inside the device that can unleash the premium network resources as a dedicated connection over T network. So the main purpose is to increase the quality of experience of the application. For video streaming, this can mean to have more throughput, low latency, and the application should be able to ask for these resources to the network through a convenient enabler on the device, because this should be regulated for all the application of the user. So there should be an optimizer on the device. And then if the application is trusted, what does it mean? If the application provider is an operator customer, has reached some kind of agreement to exploit these premium network resources, the final effect will be an increased quality of experience of the streaming. This is meant to be offered to third parties, but we are already experimenting this in Telecom Italia, first of all with our own application, to prove, to demonstrate that there is some difference if we are able to trigger these network resources, especially over LTE. So the evolution of the network to 4G connection brings something more to be offered. We have a particular video streaming client application that is called Serie A. This is the streaming of football matches of our national championship. And we would like to try this network mechanism with this very popular application. So the work item will be finalized during next year, but in some way is already real, is effect. We are running technical trials in our company. This is a more detailed application. And this is a first example of what we can offer to application developers and so application providers and OTT service providers in general. So, in our view, this kind of work item, DANE, QoS API, is going in the right direction, but it's not enough. Which could be the general opportunity to exploit and to have a service layer organization as OMA at the center of the apps space. First of all, we have really to understand how application work. So, how we have to define the quality of experience of an application. This should be measurable. This should be a quantitative expression of this perceived experience. So the applications are really various, are hundreds of millions, but we believe the first step should be to categorize them, to divide them into some typical categories. For example, application demanding for high bandwidth, high throughput, or gaming application demanding instead for low latency, application demanding for location capability, for example, in indoor location and can't exploit the usual GPS system on the device and so on. When they run, they use the network in different ways, and we have to understand how. In this way, we will be able to define quantitative key performance indicators for each category. And then we have to make an even more difficult effort. We have to try to find the relationship between those KPIs and the network resources. And only as a final step, we have to define the API to disclose the resources, because too often we are focused on how to offer something, but we do not know exactly what to offer, what can really be valuable. And this, in my view, should be driven, but the resources the applications are demanding to sustain their quality of experience. So you can see that somebody is already starting to speak about ADN, application defined networking. This can be a buzzword or a really good paradigm to pursue. My opinion, SDN in itself is not so, software-defined networking is not so useful, is not so crucial, because as in this Escher drawing, the network reshapes itself, but we do not know for which purpose. So the application layer really shall drive the usage of network resources. Another interesting domain, apart from human devices, so not just smartphone, tablets. Take a look for one moment at the machine-to-machine domains. That is very, very promising, really, both in terms of figures, new functionalities involved. Again, the ADN paradigm can be applied also because the network will show a new set of capabilities that are the sensing capabilities, very interesting. And what is the architecture here below? An architecture taken from a service layer organization, 1 and 2M, but these clearly show that also MA is starting to cover these issues and these aspects, and is starting to define some APIs to control from the top the machine-to-machine network as they were really a network operating system. So we have to intend, for example, the wireless sensor network and the central system regulating a smart home environment. Just to give an example, we have to intend as a network operating system, as an operating system of a PC, controlling a lot of different resources, but being at the service of the final application. And we can also think, and this is written in the second bullet, to do something more. Currently, our focus is related to the definition of protocols for the dialogue between different elements in this machine-to-machine network. Then we are defining, this is very important, data structure. So, for example, management object in the device management framework to represent the resources of each element. But maybe to have the OTT player, so some business logic on the top of this architecture as customer, we have to offer something more, being focused on the final use case. If the target, for example, is the smart city environment, and in Europe some municipalities are starting to doing something, the first use cases are quite clear. They involve, for example, transportation, public lighting, wasting, and so on. So we could offer to third parties not only elementary data structure, but a kind of protocol or product, a product really to sell that is that brings more meaning, more semantic. For example, data structure that can indicate if the public lighting system of smart cities is efficient or not. This is sometimes we call it in Telecom Italia conceptual map. This can be our final product for us, that we can be the owner of this sensing network to offer to third parties for further elaboration. And then the last third, at least the third domain, but the list can be longer indeed. That is again related to machine in general, Internet of Things, and this notion of smart spaces. So for sure, if smart cities, Internet of Things architecture will be realized, we will then daily be across this space, these smart spaces. We will be walking, living, interacting with these spaces, always with our smartphone. So, in our view, there is room for operators to be a trusted and well-recognized identity provider. So the smart space shall be able to recognize us, recognize me as the owner of the smartphone when I cross the shopping mall, the museum, the smart building, and so on, based on my really trusted and recognize mobile identity. So this is a role for operator we can't deny. We are the owner, as I show, for example, the case in the first slide of 100 million different mobile identities with all legal implication, and we can think to offer these to third parties. So when I go to the museum, I can do something, I can interact with some capabilities of that venue, but not others, because my profile says that I have access only to one part of the venue and so on. And this can be treated locally. I can also have alias and so on, but related to my real legal identity. So, trying to summarize, given this scenario that is real and the revolution has started 6 or 7 years ago and is very well consolidated, where we can find some room at the service layer to build a fairer balance, fairer relationship between operators and OTT in a win-to-win framework. OMA, or in general service layer organization, have really to enter the application space, providing APIs to define apps quality of experience and realizing the application-defined network. The first step should be, in that case, to identify what means, in a measurable way, what means quality of experience of application. Define machine-to-machine APIs intended to control and instantiate machine-to-machine networks in an apps-driven fashion, network operating system for a wireless sensor network, for example. Moreover, define standardized semantic patterns for sensor aggregators, so at home level, at city level, not only elementary data structure. And finally, for smart spaces, define the enablers, define some enablers to let operators really play their role of a trusted identity provider. Okay, that's all.